Hey guys, welcome to another video. So let's talk about the 6 most recent romance books that I read. So the first one I want to talk about is The Fire Between High and Low, which is the second book in the Elements series by Brittany C. Cherry. This is the story of 2 high school sweethearts, and one of them is named Logan, and he comes from a pretty not great family. His mom is addicted to drugs. His dad is very abusive, not really in the picture except when he wants something from the mom, and just not a great home situation. He himself is also addicted to drugs. And then we have our female main character who comes from a wealthy family, but her dad left the picture and is kind of in and out of her life, and she doesn't really know how she feels about that. They start off as friends, and she kind of provides him the love, acceptance that he never really got from any of his friends or his family aside from his half brother. They get into a relationship and something tragic happens in the relationship that splits them up. He ends up leaving town, and some years later he comes back and they spark up a relationship again. And through the book you are seeing him dealing with being in recovery from drugs, in addition to some family issues that he's dealing with, some illnesses in his family, and just a lot of stuff that really scarred him about this town and just being back. That's really bothering him. And then she never left the town, and she seems to have kind of frozen in place after he left. She kind of just like got a job and wasn't really living. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Brittany C. Cherry has a fantastic way of writing characters that they just feel so real, and their issues feel so real, and you get emotionally connected. If we had gotten more of the story in the past, it would have been a little bit more emotional, because I could tell that dealing with Logan's drug addiction and all of that was really hard. I felt very emotionally connected to them, and I knew like this is not a book that I could read in public because it was just sad. We kind of changed halfway through into like present day when they're adults, and that I think lessened a little bit of the emotional response to it. And I think that if we had remained in the past and like seen more of a gradual change throughout the years, it would have incited a little bit more emotion. And the reason I gave it 4 stars was because I felt like the patching up of their relationship was a little too swift. The thing that caused them to separate was a very not great thing. Like, they went through something really bad and something that they would need to address and handle about their relationship, and I felt like it was really brushed over too easily. And I think that all of the important conversations that they should have had, the female main character was just like, yeah, whatever, I mean, it is what it is, we'll just move past it. And I wasn't a huge fan of that. I felt like I wanted a little bit more of them dealing with their issues than what we got. So the next romance book that I read was Teach Me by Olivia Dade. I've been describing it as just like a slice of life romance between 2 teachers, middle-aged teachers, I would say in their 40s, and they are just going into this relationship with all of the burdens of, you know, having the experience of bad relationships, bad marriages, and having to be co-workers and working together, and just the baggage of being a normal person that's been through some things, and having to figure out how your relationship is going to work, and, you know, getting through each other's problems and getting through each other's insecurities and trust issues. And it was really good. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because it wasn't pretty, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't groundbreaking, but it was just a very nice, like, slice of life book about 2 people just trying to figure out how to be together and get through their issues together. Then I read Hate to Want You, which is sort of like a Romeo and Juliet-esque story of 2 families that were originally business partners, I guess, And then a tragedy strikes both of the families where I believe our female main character's father dies and our male main character's mother dies. And this kind of splits the families up because the male main character's father kind of writes the other family out of the business completely. And so this causes like a really big strain on the relationship. And the female main character and the male main character, they were actually high school sweethearts. And after the tragedy that happens, the female main character leaves town, but every single year on their, I want to say on her birthday or on their anniversary, she texts him a location with her coordinates. That's basically where they are, and then they spend one night together, just sex. And then the rest of the year, they don't talk to each other. In the beginning of the book, she comes back into town to take care of her mother, and they have to deal with running into each other, and she just kind of has to deal with all of the emotional baggage of things that happened in the past and learning to get over it. And they still want to be together, they still love each other, and they kind of have to work through all of the issues that they had. I wasn't super connected to the story or any of the characters really. Rooted for them in that, like, in the moment I wanted them together, but if they hadn't ended up together, I don't know if I would have been like heartbroken or if I would have been disappointed. I wasn't necessarily rooting for either of them. I didn't love either of them, so I didn't really care much about them together. It's not that it was poorly written, I don't think. I just wasn't fully invested in the story, and I couldn't honestly tell you what would need to change for that to be different, but I just wasn't 100% into it, you know what I mean? So the next romance that I read is Only for a Night, which is a novella, and it's part of a series, a trilogy called the Lick series, and it follows the series follows the three owners of a sex club. And the first book is about one of the owners, and he previously had a relationship with this woman, and she was like the one that got away. And one night she shows up at the club and says, listen, I want to just have one night where I get whatever I want. Like, I learn about sex and what I want and my taste and just all of that. And so they have one night together, and it's in the sex club, and there's different, you know, kinks and stuff shown, and it's incredibly smutty. It's like sex scene after sex scene. There are some conversations that they have where the female main character like opens up about the previous marriage that she was in and kind of all of the insecurities that came from that. But a lot of it is just them exploring what she needs and learning how to pleasure herself and like what exactly she needs from a sexual relationship. And of course, you know, it's a romance, so it ends with them getting together. It's a really good novella. Like, it's sexy, it's smutty, it's written very well, the sex scenes are written very well, the story itself is great. I think that the things that the female main character go through is to some extent pretty common for most women. I think that a lot of the time women have to kind of not be as open about their own sex and their own pleasure and exploring their own pleasure until they learn to ask for what they want or gain that confidence in themselves to ask for what they want, or they find that partner where they feel comfortable speaking, like saying to them like, this is what I want to try, this is what I think I like, etc. With their partner or partners, they learn, you know, how to pleasure themselves. And I think that that's a pretty common thing. I will say that this deals a lot more with like emotional abuse and mental abuse from her ex-husband than I would hope most women deal with, but I think any woman can relate to this to a certain extent, and I think it's a fantastic read. If you are not uncomfortable with, like, you know, the more sexy, smutty scenes, and that's something that you like, I would recommend picking this up. It's fantastic. I didn't give it 5 stars because it just wasn't that 5-star for me. So my next 3 books that I read, I actually read for a reading vlog. So I'm not gonna go like too in depth into those, but I didn't like them. So the first book that I read was Beach Read, which it's made its rounds on BookTube, but it's basically the story of two writers who are at their beach homes, and they are in writing slumps, and so they go into this bet that they're gonna write each other's genres, and then whoever ends up writing a book will get shouted out by the other genre. The female main character is a romance writer, and then the male is like a literary fiction. That's kind of what happens. There's a lot of different plot lines in it. Grief, trauma from past relationships, and things like that. The central plot is that, and of course the romance between the two. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was the best that I read for this video, but it still wasn't my cup of tea. So something that this video taught me in particular is that the more fluffy, I wouldn't necessarily consider this fluffy, but the more like fluffy, I guess contemporary romances aren't really my thing. Like I want a lot of grit, a lot of angst, just more than this. The plot was all over the place. I think that there were too many plot lines for the capabilities of the story, if that makes sense. So there was the writing plot lines, the romance plot lines, the like other aspects of the story of them like trying to find ideas and things like that, and it couldn't happen like at the same time, and it just was like one plot was happening or the other was happening, and the other plot lines were forgotten while one was happening, if that makes sense. So it just wasn't well executed in my opinion. There, I think the lighting is a little bit better. The next book that I read for that video was Party of Two, which is the romance between a lawyer and a senator, and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. The politician thing really did not work for me. It made for one, the characters were really boring, and the politician thing made the conflicts just really not interesting. They weren't interesting as characters. The sex scenes were fade to black. Just all of it just was not my thing, and I just didn't really like it, any of it. It was flat, it was boring, just not for me. And then the last book that I finished for that video was The Worst Best Man, which I gave 3 out of 5 stars as well. Okay, so it's about a wedding planner who got left on her wedding day, and it appears as if the brother of the groom is the reason that the marriage got called off. And then she ends up having to work with the brother-in-law and her ex to get a job, and a romance sparks between the two. Again, this is a very popular romance, and a lot of people love it. It was not for me. It's fluffy, it's trope-filled, it's just not my jam. It's not gritty enough for me. It wasn't for me. How many times am I gonna say that? That's all I have to say. 3 out of 5 stars. Go Deep by Rilzy Adams, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. I read Will You Be Mine by Rilzy Adams earlier this year. I gave that one 5 out of 5 stars too. This is the relationship between a romance writer and her best friend. So this is a novella, and the romance writer feels like she has lost her mojo. Her writing's not as sexy. She's getting some bad reviews. So she tells her best friend, like, I need you to help me remedy this. Like, can we start hooking up? Let me get it back in the groove, and then we can, you know, break it off and I'll write some books, etc. They do. They smash, and wow. It's written so well. The characters are so endearing, and you love the characters, you love their personalities, you love them together as a couple, and the sex scenes are just like immaculately written, so good. Like she's like an auto read author now, because her writing is just fantastic. Sure, it's fantastic sex scenes. All her characters are fantastic, just so good. Go read this if you want a steamy friends to lovers romance, because there's one scene in a restaurant where when you get to it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And then the last romance I want to talk about is Desperate Measures, which is Katie Roberts' first book in her villains series, which is like Disney villains reimagined and then sexy. And then the main plot is about Hades, who owns a sex club, or that's the thing that connects all of them. But the first book is Jasmine and Jafar, and Jafar is a crime boss and Jasmine is the daughter of a rival crime boss, and in the beginning he kills her father and he like owns her now. First off, Katie Robert is a fantastic writer. I will say going into this, it can be uncomfortable for some people. I definitely recognize that. There is the idea of safe words used, but the kink is like non-consensual, if that makes sense. So she doesn't use the safe word, but she says like no, and she like runs from him and things like that. So I can understand why that would be upsetting for some people. There is a note in the very beginning that like explains what exactly is going on and that everything is consensual, and she never says the safe word to get him to stop, and like he doesn't stop, if that makes sense, but that is just like part of their thing. So just keep that in mind if that's something that makes you uncomfortable. You know, there might be other like kinks and stuff in the rest of the series, but just keep that in mind if you want to go into this one. I loved it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I think it was just very well done. It didn't get 5 stars because the characters aren't as like cemented and solidified as I would have liked, but still altogether written very well and just well done. I would continue the rest of the series. Hopefully KU makes it free, or it'll become free at some point. Those are the romances I want to talk about. Make sure you comment down below if you've read any of these romances, what you thought of them, or if you want to recommend some romances to me. I am always up for some recommendations, but other than that, I will catch you guys in my next video. Thanks so much for watching.